One disadvantage in having we usually have this meeting in November. So by November, we usually have much more detailed data. So I just want to alert you to that now. I'm going to, as we go along, mention some data that's sort of preliminary, and we haven't been able to do the type of analysis we typically would. And so you may actually have some answers yourselves in terms of why things are happening, or at least from the perspective of your campus. So I encourage you at some point, if you'd like to share that to do so. Now, a lot of times at this meeting, I see a number of faces I've seen year after year after year, and there are only about 3 or 4 of you that I've seen that. How many were actually associated with your institution in one way or another, whether a trustee or not, in 2000? Okay, so a few of you. So as we go forward and you see some of the good things, congratulate these folks because they've helped to contribute to that. But I think it's important that you sort of understand why we created this plan to begin with. And we're in the 12th year. Now, back in 1999, our board actually decided it was time to develop a plan, and it was a different plan. If you looked at other states, the higher education plans would go on for 150 pages. And they'd have details on just about everything one could imagine. But our board said, we need a much more focused plan. We need a plan that will be for the whole state, that really will hold people accountable for a few things, but give them the latitude to decide how best to do it at their campus. And I think that's sort of unique among plans. And if you look back over the last decade, there are a lot more plans like this than there were at that time. And so many of your predecessors helped create this plan and create one that's really endured a remarkable amount of time. There have been, aside from the California Master Plan, I don't think there's been a plan that's endured for more than 4 or 5 years in the country. Well, at that time, as people looked, they knew that the population was changing in the state. We all know that. Everybody accepts that now. But it was a little bit more news at the time, and people didn't really know the implications. We had this great state demographer, Stephen Murdoch, who later left to run the U.S. Census Bureau and is now a professor at Rice. And he helped work with us on this. And at the time, you know, we were really very good on forecasting enrollments at institutions. At that time, we said, well, you know, by 2015, we'll have a little bit more than 200,000 students in 2015. Now, that sounded pretty good, right? Well, the reality was, if we had only 200,000 more students, we'd actually have what you see here, an unskilled, undereducated population, because a smaller percentage of our population would actually be going to college. We'd see a decline in household income by about $4,800 per family. We could fool ourselves, which many states did at the time, say, okay, well, we're going to have 200,000 more students. That's great. It's wonderful. It's a good thing. But the state said, no, it's just not possible to really have a prosperous future. So closing the gaps was really about not feathering the bed of higher education, but it was about the future of Texas. It was making a much more educated workforce to make people better enabled to participate in decision-making in the state, to serve on boards, to serve on local school boards, to do various things and be wise in those that they vote for, to really make decisions and engage in discussion. So we've made a lot of progress in that regard, and we're going to talk about that as we go forward. But in the board spirit of developing a focused plan, they settled on 4 areas, 4 big goals that they thought would make a difference. Increased participation, increased success, which you've heard a lot about in recent years. And why increase success? It doesn't make any difference just to enroll students if they're not going to actually succeed, if they're not going to really reap some benefits from enrolling. And while it may be hard to believe, at that time, most state universities and community colleges in the country were focused on enrolling students. It's not to say they were ignoring success. They weren't. But it was mainly focused on let's get more students in the doors. We've made progress on success, and we'll talk about that. Excellence, it doesn't make any sense just to have programs that people are graduating from, whether they're certificates or PhDs, if they're not good programs. We needed to make sure they were good programs, that students really were going to benefit from what they were learning. And included in this were also the idea that it wasn't just the programs themselves, but we had to have good programs for folks that might need some help. So if people had an outstanding student Student Affairs Department, that was a good thing too, to have great developmental ed. You know, a university didn't have to be a University of Texas at Austin necessarily to be successful. You could be a university that every person in the industry knew the students who entered there weren't as prepared as other institutions, but when they graduated, they wanted those students because the school did such a good job of graduating those students. And that's really our goal for all our institutions, where they graduate with their certificate, an associate or bachelor's degree. We want them to benefit, we want the state to benefit, and we want employers say, these are folks we want working for us because they know things, they've learned to work hard, and they know how to make things happen. And I think we've made a lot of progress in that. Research, originally in research, we had a goal, a dollar goal, but we realized that a couple things. Number one, the feds are even slower in reporting data than states are. And by the time we got our first data, we discovered that when we created the plan, we had already achieved our goal because the data we'd been using was from 1998, and we didn't get 2000 data until 2002. So, hey, we hit our first goal, and we changed it immediately. So that we're really talking about we need to keep our share of the federal research dollars to be competitive nationally. So participation. That first round, we said we needed 500,000 more students. Well, in the board's wisdom, they said we were going to evaluate our plan regularly, and it became clear fairly early we were going to hit our $500,000. Or far beyond the 500,000. We could use that in many increments. But 500,000 students, so the board said we need to be aggressive. There's no point in having a plan that you can easily achieve, right? So this has been a pressing plan. A number of these goals we've changed over time because the board said, okay, we're doing well, we can even do better. So they increased that to 630,000 students. Well, our goal included overall goal, but we also had targets below this. So in terms of statewide participation, we were well above the target. We're doing actually better than we had expected in terms of African American participation. We increased that target 8 years ago because we had surpassed it. So we increased the target again, and we're above that. Hispanic participation, unfortunately, we're still well below that target, and white participation, we're below that target. But the targets here are really sort of like gauges to say why might we not be achieving our goal. So the board said very clearly, we can hit our overall goal for participation, but if we are failing on our Hispanic target, if we're failing on our African American target, we're still not succeeding. We have to hit those to say we're really successful with our overall goal. Now, you saw yesterday the commissioner that this went briefly over the screen, and I just want you to know a little bit about what this really means. So in terms of Texas, you can see we're at 6.1%. What does that mean? That means 6.1% of our overall population is enrolled in college. Okay, so that wouldn't be obvious. And at the time we created this, we looked at a lot of numbers. We looked at 15 to 34 population. We looked at 18-year-olds. As you know, and if you were here last night, and I hope you were because it was a great presentation, the population has changed. So we have a wide range of folks we've got 16-year-olds in college, we have 80-year-olds in college. And plus, something just fundamental. We wanted to be able to check where we were every year. You can't get to the 15 to 34 population with other states every year. We had a great demographer, we could do that in Texas, but we wanted to be able to compare ourselves. So this is something you can get, and I can tell you the population distribution in every state is different. It's not just ethnically, but age. At the time we created this, Texas was very bimodal. We were very young and we were very old both. And the age distribution varies by ethnicity. So bear that in mind. At the time, we set a goal for 5.7% of our overall population to be participating in higher education. You can see that at least overall we've hit that, but other states have improved during that time. And these numbers can be what can be big differences. At the time, Texas being behind 1 percentage point meant we had 180,000 students that weren't enrolled in school that should have been. So small percentages here make a big difference. Well, we began then to look at how things flow through. It's not just all about higher education, right? So we developed what we called the 7th grade cohort at that time, and you may have recently seen Houston Endowments come out with an 8th grade cohort, which we worked with them to develop, and it's an 8th grade cohort that they're using because other states can't do a 7th grade cohort. So we have some comparison with other states. But I just wanted to show this to you. So what does this mean? There's a bar that's not here that has all the 7th graders in public schools in the state. Okay? Now this next bar says when they should be in the 9th grade, only 88% were still there. Only 88% were still there. Well, what could, now, number one, let me say, we can follow a student from any public school to any public school in the state. We have a great data system. We've got one of the 2 or 3 best in the country. U.S. Chamber of Commerce this summer noted that the just really amazing data system Texas has. So we're able to follow these things. If they went to a private school, we couldn't track them. If they left the state, we can't track them. But 88% were there a few years later. When you reach the point where they should have graduated from high school, it was down to 68%. Now, this is a more recent cohort. It was worse when we first did this. Then in college, we find 52%. And after all this time in 2011, only 19% had completed a higher education degree or certificate. So we have a lot of loss during this period. Now, I just want to tell you one little glitch we found that was a positive glitch. This is the first time we did this. We found 18,000 students enrolled in higher education that we couldn't find that graduated from high school. So that doesn't mean they didn't, but it tells you how robust the data system is. Those were students who may have left the state and come back. There were students who may have gone to a private high school and we don't have records for. They may have been students that were homeschooled. They still show up in the data. So this is important, and we've done this by various regions, and if you're in a particular region and you'd like to see this cohort for your region, we can provide it to you. So you saw this as well yesterday. We've got the 630,000 target. By 2011, we had 532,000 students. So we're actually above our target, though our goal, even though we hadn't hit the number of Hispanic students that we needed. And I didn't mention earlier, one reason for doing the percent of the population is back in the 90s, the board used to put out press releases about how many more Hispanic students there were. If we just talked about the number of Hispanic students, we'd look like we're very successful. Because the increase in numbers of Hispanic students is huge, but still doesn't represent the participation that we really need in higher education. So looking at the numbers and really making sure they're telling the right story is important. Now, for several years, we had just dramatic increases in enrollment. And there are a number of reasons for that. I think we were doing a better job. It was the case that we are also, and people forgetting these participation numbers, this isn't new enrollments, this is total enrollments. So part of the improvement represents the efforts of your institutions to improve retention and persistence of your own students. So we also, during this period, students are not dropping out if they were dropping out as soon as they were, or more people are completing degrees. So that is robust and helps build up the numbers. Well, this fall we just have preliminary numbers, and our enrollments are up about 12,000 students, which, given Texas history, is very low. And it's about 7,000 at universities and 5,000 at community colleges. That's the reverse what it's been. We know that there are a number of late enrollments at community colleges, so we're wondering if that number will go up a little bit because we collected the data a couple of weeks earlier than normal. But wherever it goes, we know it's going to be lower than in recent years. Now, when we get the individual records for every student in November from your institution, so make sure you report on time because we have to figure this out, we'll be able to do some analysis and figure out really, have a better sense of what's happening. We don't know if this is something to worry about, if it's an anomaly, but I can just tell you a few possibilities. One possibility is that the economy is doing enough better and that some of your students are having opportunities to go back and work full-time and they're choosing to do it. Hopefully that's part of the reason. A very positive reason I just thought of driving here this morning, and I think it will be reflected in the numbers, but only a little bit at this point. But, you know, if we do a better job of retaining students, they're actually more likely to graduate. As more students graduate sooner, that will mean there'll be at least some lowering of the total numbers related to that. Now, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on that number being as small as it is this year, but we have to bear in mind that if you are keeping students in school, say if you're in a university and they're graduating in 4 years instead of 8 or 9, they're going to be counted several years less than they would have before. So that's not a bad thing. So we're going to have to develop some rubric for getting at that. But you may want to ask at your own institutions what's happened. Some institutions have gone up, some down. And I know even talking with individual presidents, it's sometimes it's hard to know. It's hard to know, but you can get at more detailed data than we can, and that's maybe something you want to discuss. But it's not necessarily a bad thing at an individual institution if your enrollment's staying flat. I mean, you could be given your demographics, doing great given those demographics. And so you really have to think of your individual circumstances. Now, I'm just going to go by this part very quickly because it's really older data, as we don't have the detailed data this fall, but you can see that the growth last year, 53% of it was at public universities, and they had a smaller number, and so it was a little bit easier to get that up. But we're close to 1.5 million students. I should say, too, I forgot to mention, in terms of that 12,000 figure, we don't have proprietary school numbers in there yet. We can't get data as quickly as them, so that will boost the number a little bit, but we're mainly concerned about your efforts. The enrollment of African Americans remains strong. The commissioner mentioned that yesterday. But in terms of all groups, really, this is a national phenomenon. Males are just not enrolling in college at the levels that they should be. I've had occasion in the last few years to look at the common data sets for a lot of private institutions in other states that are very selective. And you can see that at those schools, males are really getting a boost in terms of enrollments. The schools are trying to keep their male-female mix about the same, and you can see that males are being admitted at many of these more selective schools at a much higher rate than the women are. But if you look at their test scores, the women are much better prepared than the guys. So aside from having a problem with not enough males going on to college, we also have, I think, the additional issue that other states are really, and institutions across the country are really aggressively trying to get male students enrolled. So things have changed a lot in that regard. Again, you have to see, we must accelerate progress on Hispanic enrollment. Each of your institutions has a target for this. And I encourage, if you're not aware of your target for Hispanic enrollment, that you go back and look at it. Over many years, we've seen institutions that have really modest targets for Hispanics. And I can tell you that you just can't really survive in Texas without Hispanic enrollments. Hispanics are our state. Hispanics are our future. We're all the future, but the increasing proportion of the state is Hispanic, and if you don't understand that, you're just not going to be educating the population you should be educating. We need to make sure we're addressing everyone. This should be obvious, but students enrolling in colleges directly from high school are meeting our TS. This is Texas success rates. This is whether you're ready for college or not at a higher rate. I guess it may not be as obvious to you, but it's obvious that if you're college ready, you're more likely to succeed in college, right? But we are seeing an improvement. It's important to understand we are seeing an improvement in the preparation of high school students that are going on to college. They're still not where they should be yet, but they are doing better. We're seeing, I just asked 2 days ago for staff to run some new numbers for me in terms of the amount of developmental ed students are needing when they enroll in college. 2 years ago, we saw that while we had too many students in developmental ed, they were taking less developmental ed than they were before, which indicates that they're a little bit better prepared. I'm wanting more recent data to see if this is a continuing trend, but most of our developmental ed is taking place in community colleges, and community colleges are doing an increasingly better job at developmental ed. So You ought to be aware of that, and those of you that are community college trustees, you need to know that your staff has been working just almost relentlessly in trying to figure out how to do a better job with developmental ed students. And there's a wonderful effort at the Community College Association in terms of student success and developmental ed, which we think is going to make a real difference as we go forward. Students returning to college aren't as well prepared. This isn't surprising. I'm glad to say that we did a study on math developmental a few years ago, and the reality is if you're starting to get a lot older, the much older students are actually more likely to be college prepared in terms of math, which is interesting. So if I were to go back to school, at least I might be able to be college ready on math. And those of you that are in my age range, it may be the case. And I guess as we get further along, we're a little bit more concerned with finance, and we're starting to, if we haven't run numbers before, we're starting to do them again. Success. Our goal was to have 210,000 more undergraduate degree certificates and other identifiable student successes by 2015. You may wonder what this other identifiable student successes was. We gave the option to schools if they could define a program that didn't fit, it wasn't a traditional, it wasn't a certificate, it wasn't a degree, that they could define that and report it to us. Virtually nobody did that. But we gave the option to do that, but we said if you do this, you've got to report it to us. And I think that's why we didn't get too much of that. But we do need to realize that there are other things going on that are important at schools, particularly at community colleges, because there are things called marketable skills awards for those at universities. It's really, like 3 courses are combined in a very focused kind of way, and that can vary a lot depending on the local market needs. And those are important, but they're not counted in here. But we are virtually the only state in the country, I've been surprised to discover, that recognizes the importance of certificates and counts them when we're talking about success in college. So Texas, for a decade, or really more like almost 20 years now, has understood the importance of that more than other states have. And I've been a little bit surprised to realize that others haven't understood that before now. So in terms of our specific targets, we're somewhat above our target in terms of the traditional types of measures. We're a little bit below our target in terms of African American awards. That's primarily, I'm sorry, again, because of males. Males, when they get in, aren't graduating at the same rate. The African American women are just, they're off the charts. They're doing so great. Hispanic awards, we're on target. So even though we're not enrolling enough Hispanic students yet, we're doing a much better job with them in terms of graduating. I'll talk more about technology awards in a minute in nursing and teaching. The underrepresented groups we've talked about have experienced the greatest % increase in undergraduate awards. That's at one level understandable because the underrepresented groups were doing much more poorly in terms of graduating. So if someone's not doing well to begin with, it's easier to improve that. So hopefully we'll reach the point where everyone's graduating at such a good rate that it will be a challenge to get to the next level. And we're getting closer. We're on track for awarding bachelor's and associate degrees to meet the 2015 target. Let me say something about associate degrees. Is one thing that the community colleges did many did when we first developed this goal is they realized that students had the requirements to graduate, but they just weren't filing for graduation. So there were a number of institutions that actively went out and made sure that students knew to file, or in some cases, they waived the fee in cases. But we actually had a dramatic increase in associate degrees over a 2-year period because there was more conscious effort to award the degrees. And then there were some anomalies. I don't remember whether it was Odessa College or Midland. A lot of their students went to UT Austin. UT Austin didn't require a PE, and that particular community college required PE to get an associate degree. So they just weren't graduating because they didn't have PE. And so those are things that we need to work out in a few cases. I'm not sure if that occurs any longer. We've made good progress in the health awards. Overall, these include everything from radiology to whatever you call it when you take blood. Thank you, thank you. You know, I try to forget that because when I go and have mine taken, I sort of look over to the side. Mary Smith used to do that many years ago, by the way. We've made little progress in STEM fields. Now, I want to tell you, STEM fields typically, well, really everywhere else includes biological sciences. In Texas, in our critical fields, we don't include biological sciences because we're really great in producing graduates in that area. That's one area in science where we don't have any difficulty producing students, at least for the last 2 decades. We're doing better in nursing. Originally, our goal was not to produce any fewer nurses because there was a decline, but we're actually are making gains in that area, and there are a lot of creative programs. You heard about one yesterday at the Star Awards at UT Arlington, in which I think they went from, 100 graduates a year to 800 graduates. Just amazing. There's a lot of creativity in the field, and that's one reason the board really made the point not to tell schools exactly how to achieve some of the goals, because there's so much creativity on your campus. If you put your mind to it, you can figure out how to achieve it in a way that meets your student population in your region. Teachers, you know, and interesting things happened over the years is really our gain in terms of teachers is from alternative certification. But we're still falling short of the number of teachers we need. But you see now we're actually producing more teachers through alternative certification than through traditional programs in schools of ed. And related to the STEM fields is we just are not producing enough math teachers, period. If we took every student that received a math degree from a university and made them into a teacher, we still wouldn't have enough math teachers. So that's a continuing dilemma, and there are far more students that are qualified to be math teachers than are majoring in math. I know that. I can give you more anecdotes than you want to hear about students I personally know that could very easily do that but have chosen not to. All right, so what's happening in terms of students transferring from community colleges? You know, one thing that's been interesting to see is, and I only noticed this first 2 years ago, but we actually have a statistic that's not on this particular chart, which is what percentage of our baccalaureate graduates took at least 30 semester credit hours of a community college? Does anybody have an idea what percent that might be typically? It's almost 36% statewide of all our baccalaureate graduates had at least 30 semester credit hours. That doesn't count the people who had the smaller number, the 0 to 12 number, and you know, huge percentage of them do. At some institutions like UT El Paso, 49.8, almost 50% of the students who graduate from UT El Paso had at least 30 semester credit hours at a community college, probably El Paso Community College. Anyone here from El Paso Community College? They're too busy helping students graduate. I mean, they're really doing a great job. I mean, that's a perfect example. I mean, the number of graduates at UT El Paso since 2000 has gone up by about 2,200 students. The biggest piece of that is really the relationship with El Paso Community College and the students who transfer from El Paso Community College to the university. It's amazing. It's a good thing. But universities have finally come to realize the quality of students that are at community colleges. We have some of you know about what we have called the Voluntary Transfer Compact. And one of my favorite examples of this, we were working on mechanical engineering, and there was a physics professor from A&M happened to be participating in this, and there was a physics instructor from Houston Community College, and they were talking about what was required in this first introduction to physics, and the professor from A&M says, "You're asking an awful lot of those students at HCC. Maybe you could, you know, take some of that out of the curriculum." I don't know that he was essentially saying it was an extremely rigorous course that they were providing at Houston Community College. So part of what's happening is, and as we have some of these endeavors to get people together, their respect for each other is growing a lot, I think. There's still some distance to go, but there's a real recognition of the value of community college students. Now, I want to tell you, as we go to outcomes-based funding, it's even more value because graduates will be counted at the university, whether they started at a community college or started at the university. So those of you at community colleges, your students are going to become even more attractive, not just because they're very good. But here you see that this gives you an idea of the breakdown in terms of the number of hours that students took before they transferred to universities. Excellence in research, you heard the commissioner say yesterday that excellence isn't defined nearly as well, and it is always hard to define excellence. What is excellence? But we did say that we wanted to increase the number of nationally recognized programs or services, and I made reference to what that is earlier, and I talked about research. But let's say something about the targets. That at the time, the national rankings were there, and everyone knows that there are issues with the national rankings, and on that we're well below the target at the time. Program recognition, this is individual programs that are being recognized one way or another. We're doing a lot better on that, and I think that's one of the great things that's come out of this is virtually all of our institutions have at least one program that somebody somewhere said, this is really a good program. And sometimes we forget that. We think that all the good programs are, say, in Alston, or some of us may think they're in College Station. Actually, I went to University of Houston, too. Let me tell you about their creative writing program. They're great programs all over the state. At one time, I don't know if it still exists, we had a community college program in which they had many, many students from Asia because they had this golf course management program that people came from around the world to go to this program. It was a great program. And so we need to begin to recognize this. Texas Woman's has a number of very highly rated health programs and things like occupational therapy, and I don't remember the others, but they tend to be in the allied health. We need to be aware that at some time it may not make the most sense if someone's going to go to university to go to UT Austin. If you're criminal justice, you probably ought to go to Sam Houston. There are various things like this around the state. Students need to be well aware. If you want to run the Four Seasons Hotel in New York, you probably ought to go to University of Houston because they have one of the top 2 rated hotel and restaurant management programs. Tech has a very good hospitality program as well. These are around the state, and so one thing you need to know is just in your personal life, aside from your official duties, let people know how good the institutions are in the state. At the same time, we're working to make them much better because they can be much better than they are. One thing we forget, and when we first developed the plan, was people say, well, where are the doctoral programs? If you look at the plan, you'll know we don't have a goal for increasing the number of doctoral programs. Why? Because everybody wants to increase the number of doctoral programs. You don't have to tell them to do that. In some areas, we have more doctoral programs than a lot of other states. But the main reason is we want people to remember that the real soul, really, of higher education is undergraduate education. That's where most of our students are. 78% of all public university students are undergraduates. 78%. 91% of all our students are undergraduates when you include community colleges. And 43% of all our students are freshmen. Now, part of that's because community colleges have freshmen and sophomores. Part of it's because overall we don't do a good enough job getting students out of our freshman year. You need to look at that for your individual campus. But if you want to talk about economic drivers, there's no better economic driver to the state than producing excellent undergraduate graduates. That's where the real workforce comes from, whether they're from certificate programs, associate degrees, baccalaureate degrees. That's where the workforce primarily comes from. Graduate programs are helpful, research is helpful, but if we're not producing good undergraduates, industry will not stay in the state, new industry won't come to Texas. So that really is the soul of your operation, and we can never forget that. There are other things you can do, but that's what it's all about, really. Now, if you want to talk about the research, though, we've got to have some perspective. We've been doing this for a number of years now. One measure is how many National Academy members do you have in either science, engineering, or medicine. This is really the top recognition you can have in these fields. And believe it or not, when you look at these, we've actually gotten a little better. But right now, if you look at all the National Academy members at our institutions in Texas, we have more that are actually working for industry. But they're not included here. But if there's an industry member who's actually a clinical professor somewhere, they are counted in this. But all of Texas combined has fewer National Academy members than University of California, Berkeley. Now, we don't have on here, but we're getting a little closer, but in the past there have been at least 4 or 5 other University of California campuses that individually had more National Academy members than all of Texas combined. So part of that is, those people are earning that while they're there, and the best thing is when somebody earns National Academy recognition when they're part of your faculty. Part of it, you can bring them in. Some faculty in Texas think there's an East-West Coast bias. There may be in terms of election to the academy. But at any rate, as one measure, you can see that we have a long way to go. And some of the institutions we think, as among our better institutions, have virtually no National Academy members. Okay, R&D obligations, and we're getting close to the end here. Again, this is about our percentage of national R&D dollars, obligations. This isn't expenditures. This is how much have the Fed said our institutions are going to get. And you see that we've made some progress, but the reality is every other state on here had a head start on Texas. Every other state on here, I believe everyone, has had national laboratories for years. Texas has only recently had any national laboratories. We have one at UT, the UT Medical Branch in Galveston now, and we've seen that one's added to the Texas A&M recently, which that's going to have a huge impact on the state. UT Austin recently got, it's not a lab, but a great grant in terms of nanotechnology that's going to make a difference. So we're beginning to hold our own, but you notice that 2 of those labs were medically related. The one at A&M is medically related, and one of the state's strengths has been its health science centers and its work related to medical and biomedical issues. So we're building on that, and that can play out over time. Research expenditures continue to go up. Research expenditures include not only federal dollars, but this is where you might have income from local sources. You may have income from working agreements with various corporations to conduct research for them. We have been seeing over the last decade an increasing number of dollars from industry to pay for research at our institutions. That's a good thing. We are seeing institutions having more licensing income than they have, and in Texas, the UT system really leads in terms of licensing income, and then we're way down the list until we reach the Texas A&M system and University of Houston. University of Houston system and Texas A&M are almost identical in terms of licensing income, which is a little surprising because the A&M research enterprise is much, much larger and much more successful overall. So finally, what have we accomplished? The percentage of students entering public higher education from high schools, directly from high school, has increased from 46.4% to 54.9%. That's important because that's the sweet spot in terms of students being more likely to succeed. Everyone can't do that, of course, but the reality is that the further away you get from high school, the more likely you are to have those other risks that make it hard to graduate, debt, family, a whole range of things that can distract you from finishing your degree. We have, as we said, almost 500,000 more students. The preparation, the recommended high school program, this was part of the plan that the recommended high school program become the default curriculum. By 2011, 99% of all the public university students had completed the recommended high school program. And this next number, I think, is really exciting because it wasn't fully anticipated. But of those students going to community colleges directly from high school, 88% of them have completed the recommended high school program now. I mean, students are going into the students fresh from high school are going into community college much more prepared than they were before. And let's remember too, we run a lot of numbers, and you'll see students at community colleges that applied to universities, but they're at community colleges who have very high SATs. You don't have to take the SAT to go to a community college, but there are students at community colleges that could have probably gone to any university in the state had they chosen to, and sometimes we forget that. We were awarded 55,000 more bachelor's degrees. Oh, good. I see our next speakers here. I was a little worried. Texas has accomplished even more. Nursing awards have increased by almost 7,000. Engineering awards have increased by 4,000. But I didn't have a slide that showed it, but we're really having some difficulty with computer science, the whole country, as we're just not producing enough computer science graduates. So we're not quite sure why that is, but all of you need to work on that. One thing that was achieved is for universities prior to this plan, universities weren't able to retain all their indirect cost revenue from the research grants they got. Health science centers were able to, but that infused millions and millions of dollars into universities that they hadn't had before. They had to give half of it back. Anyway, what's the payoff? This is from Ray Perryman. This is a final slide, but it's sort of the bookend to Steve Murdoch saying what the bad future could be if we didn't have Closing the Gaps. Ray Perryman talked about what the gains would be by 2030 if we actually achieved the goals in Closing the Gaps, and that would have close to $500 billion in total spending. That means me going out and buying something. Almost $200 billion in the gross state product. 121.9 billion gain. All of these are gains in personal income rather than a $4,800 decline in family income, and over 1 million permanent jobs, not temporary jobs. Now, of course, the bad economy hadn't fully kicked in when Ray Perryman did this, but we think this is still relevant. And that concludes my presentation.